So my name's Kat, and I'm a member of the Santa Cruz Monterey Bay Area subunit of the American Fisheries Society. I am that thing. I am a member also. I want to tell you just a few things about our upcoming events. So we have an open meeting this Friday. This will be very cool if you're interested more in learning about our organization and what we do. We're mostly a group of UCSC grad students who want to foster educational outreach in the community and networking among fisheries professionals and fisheries conservation. Those are our main mission statements, but we do a lot of other fun things. And you can come to our meeting on Friday. It's at this time, right next door. There'll be snacks, so if you're interested in food. We also have a really cool event coming up on the 27th that's actually being led by our Vice President, Melissa. She is doing our second annual Fish Tales event. It's going to be a night of fish and stories and drinks. It's at the Santa Cruz Food Lounge. That'll be super cool. And then I'm going to make a personal plug for an outreach project that just got off the ground that I started. If you're interested in some real life treasure hunting, there are 5 new geocaches hidden around the Coastal Science Campus. They focus on larval fish, and they're all part of a series. You can go to the Seymour Marine Discovery Center and get a special prize if you find all 5. And there's one hidden literally right like 150 feet that way. So if you're interested, I recommend going and finding them. So that's just a little bit about us. I hope to see some of you at our open meeting on Friday. Okay, so now we're going to get into the sketchnoting thing. Just a little bit more about me. So I'm Kat. I'm a second-year PhD student in ecology and evolutionary biology. This is me. And I study little baby fish, so larval fish, and specifically how they move through the ocean. So are they currents, is it swimming? What about them is influencing where they're going? And you'll hear a little bit more about that at the end of this workshop. I'm going to do a little short practice talk for you about some of my work. How I got into sketchnoting, visual note taking. I was at a conference in January where I took a cool workshop by a guy named Shale Matsuda. He is really involved with the scientific communication area, and I was really inspired by this workshop. I went and immediately started sketching all of the conference, the rest of SCMBAS. I just used the free notepads that they had around the conference venue, but I immediately found myself way more engaged and involved and connected with the talks. I was just using a Sharpie and these notepads, and I still go back and look at those now, and they're helpful to me even today. So, and since then I've sketched lectures for the classes I TA and lectures for the classes I'm taking. I sketched an another conference. I'm really interested in this, and it's really made a big difference in my life. This is definitely not the only way to take notes, but it's another way to take notes. And if you're interested in why sketchnoting, I have 2 short video clips that I'm hoping will work, that will convince you, hopefully more. The first one we're going to hear from is Suni Brown. She gave a talk in 2011. It's a TED Talk, and hopefully this works. It is on the importance of doodling. And they don't seem to be working. That's great. These were acting really funky yesterday too. So I really like them. Maybe I can just bring them up. Yeah, maybe we can just skip it. Or I can play it for you right now. Look at this. I can better start a lot with doing this. It's okay. She's going to talk for you.
And here is the real deal. Here's what I believe. I think that our culture is so intensely focused on verbal information that we're almost blinded to the value of doodling. And I'm not comfortable with that. And so because of that belief that I think needs to be burst, I'm here to send us all hurtling back to the truth. And here's the truth. Doodling is an incredibly powerful tool, and it is a tool that we need to remember and to relearn. So here's a new definition for doodling, and I hope there's someone in here from the Oxford English Dictionary because I want to talk to you later. Here's the real definition. Doodling is really to make spontaneous marks to help yourself think. That is why millions of people doodle. Here's another interesting truth about the doodle. People who doodle when they're exposed to verbal information retain more of that information than their non-doodling counterparts. We think doodling is something you do when you lose focus, but in reality, it is a preemptive measure to stop you from losing focus. Additionally, it has a profound effect on creative problem solving and deep information processing. There are 4 ways that learners intake information so that they can make decisions. They are visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. Now, in order for us to really chew on information and do something with it, we have to engage at least 2 of those modalities, or we have to engage 1 of those modalities coupled with an emotional experience. The incredible contribution of the doodle is that it engages all 4 learning modalities simultaneously with the possibility of an emotional experience. That is a pretty solid contribution for a behavior equated with doing nothing. This is
So she's just talking about doodling in general, but that's basically what we do when is we're doodling. And the next thing we're going to hear from is Rachel Smith, and she's going to talk to us a little bit more about what visual note-taking is and an example of someone she knows that has used it before.
To tell you a little story about my niece, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is 13 years old. She's just going into 8th grade this year. And Elizabeth is a really good student most of the time. And last year in school, she got caught drawing in class. Astonishingly, she got in trouble. I can't believe this is still happening, but it is. So she got called up after class to the teacher, and he was going to assign her a detention. But before he could say anything, Elizabeth, who is much sharper at 13 than I was, showed him her paper. And she said, I wasn't just drawing in class. This is what she showed him. She said, I was taking notes in your class. I was paying attention. And she went over this paper with him point by point, and she used her words and her images to recall the story that he had told in his lecture. And she captured all the key points. It was clear that she had been paying attention and that she could read her notes. And when she was finished, her teacher said, that's really good. If you want to keep taking notes like that in my class, you go right ahead. So some things have changed. And she continued to do it all through the semester. And as you can see, her notes got better. She got better at organizing the information. She got better at choosing which images to use. And in the end, she was able to demonstrate that these notes could help her study. And so she was able to do it in other classes as well. I talked to her recently and I said, Elizabeth, tell me, how was this experience for you, this visual note-taking in class? What was the experience like? And this is what she said to me. She said, it helped me remember better because I could place the information with a picture that's relevant. And that's what it's all about. But the key point here is that the picture and the information are not just connected in Elizabeth's notebook. The picture and the information are connected in Elizabeth's mind. That's why visual note-taking works. What do you think is the most common objection I get when I start to teach people how to do visual note-taking? Any ideas? I'll show you. Okay, say it with me. But I can't draw. I get that all the time. Good news is it's not about drawing. It's not about making beautiful pictures. It's not about making detailed images. It's not about accurately drawing a person or a car or a light bulb. It's not even about doing something that's recognizable to anybody other than yourself. The thing that you need to do with visual note-taking is capture what you're hearing in a way that's memorable for you. It's a personal experience and it needs to be personally relevant and connect with what you heard. And that's all. So let's say.
Hopefully that was convincing to you a little bit about the power of this tool. How many of you, start on this one. How many of you would you consider yourself an artist? Okay, so I'm seeing like maybe 1 or 2 people. Well, like Rachel Smith said, the good news is that you don't have to be good at art. You're going to see a lot of stick figures in this PowerPoint. It's because I use a lot of stick figures and basic shapes to simplify complex ideas into a visual representation. Ultimately, sketchnoting really is truly about the ideas and not the art. And sometimes really good artists can actually get bogged down in the visual note-taking because they're so, like, I have to get this bird exactly right and draw all the feathers. But you're going to miss the important information that your lecture or your conference, the speaker is saying. So it's actually sometimes better if you're not really good at art. And some people don't even draw images. This is an example of some sketch notes where the person is using font and color and size to emphasize important points rather than any real doodle. Maybe just a few images on there. So there are lots of different ways that you can sketch note, and some of them don't even involve icons. So that brings us to our first practice. All right, so grab one of your pieces of paper and a marker if you don't have one. And I want you to draw your research or your work. If you're an undergraduate, maybe it's your dream job or your major. And for this, we're not going to have any words, so stick to symbols and pictures only. I'll give you maybe a minute to do this. Think about what kind of conclusions that you found so far, what kind of species you work on, or your hypotheses or thesis chapters. If you don't do research, yeah, maybe it's the kind of work you do day to day and who you work with. Alrighty, so your next job is to turn to the person next to you and exchange your paper with them and ask and try to explain their research back to them. It would be great. I know a lot of you know each other in this room, so if you can exchange your paper with someone who maybe is not as familiar with your work, and yeah, see if they can explain your research to you.
Okay, so this is an IR laser. That's green. And then you do those are electrodes. So I'm guessing, I don't know what an IR laser is. I'm guessing you're looking at the brain.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to cut you off there. I'm going to cut you off. How many of you got close? What the person was trying to represent? Okay, a few hands. Okay. So then I'm seeing a lot more no hands. So what did you find challenging about this?
You kind of have to guess what the context is sometimes.
Guess what the context is. Okay, so missing context. Certainly. Okay. Hard to do a lot quickly. Yeah, that's a challenge in sketchnoting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay. I didn't give you a lot of time, so that was one thing. Yeah. Maybe some of your research topics or your work is complex, right? It's hard to just picture in just a few short seconds or in a few short drawings. That's one of the reasons why sketchnoting is really beneficial, I think, is because it is really good at simplifying complex ideas during a talk or a presentation or your research if you had a little bit more time than the 30 seconds I gave you. That's what I found. And the mental challenge of taking auditory input and translating it into a visual medium is hard, right? That it definitely takes practice, but it requires you to listen and to understand and to create, which is great when you're looking at your conference notes later and going, wow, I really understood what this person was saying, because you have to in order to translate those two mediums. For me, it's really helped improve my engagement in classes and talks. I don't find myself falling asleep anymore. I find myself wishing I had my notebook or my sketch pad when I don't have it. I found that I am much more engaged with the speaker when it's even a topic that I didn't think I was that big a fan of, or a lecture that I'm like, I don't really care about the human body. But now I really enjoy doing it. This is a funny one. This is for me, and I've commiserated with a couple of different people about this. I actually used to feel this sort of frustration and anxiety about lined paper and staying within the lines and using it efficiently. I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but sometimes the professor would say, I'm going to talk about subjects A, B, and C. And then they would say, all right, now we're going to talk more in depth about A. And then I would be thinking, should I have left space below A? Should I be drawing arrows? Oh no, I'm going on the next page. You know, it was this actually very frustrating experience. Sketchnoting, that's no longer an issue because you can draw your page however you like. Layout's no longer left to right, top to bottom. It can be however you want. And if I need a little more space or need to connect an idea back, I just draw some arrows, and it looks great. It's a really good networking tool. I've done this before. I have sketchnoted at a conference, the plenary speaker, and then later I showed it to the plenary speaker and said, hey, sketch your talk. And it started a good conversation about their work. It's a good way to initiate a conversation that you may be a little bit unsure about initiating, and people love to see their sketch notes. This is what I found. They really like to see a visual representation of their talk or their lecture, and it's a good way for them to gauge, are they getting their information across effectively? If you sketched something different than what they were trying to get you to understand, then maybe there's something a little bit off about the way they're communicating their work or some topic in a lecture. It's really good for kinesthetic and visual learners. You're writing, you're drawing, you're moving your hands, you're looking at a page, but it's like Rachel or Cindy Brown was saying, it engages all of those different, you're listening and you're reading and you're writing and you're moving your hands and you're translating, and you might have an emotional experience. There might be something funny, or you might be drawing something you really enjoy, or you connect it to some part of your life. So it's really cool in that it engages a lot of different types of learning. And most importantly, it makes note-taking fun. On Friday, I'll tell you a personal story. On Friday, I was having sort of a bad day, and I was like, I'm just gonna leave my notebook in my office. I'll just listen to the seminar, I'm just not feeling up to it. Within 3 minutes of the guy talking, I was like, I need my notebook. I need to touch this because this is gonna be a really fun talk to draw. And it was a really fun talk. So it makes note-taking really fun. And that brings us to our second practice. So now you've listened to me talk a little bit more. Your second practice, I want you to fold your paper into quarters so it has these creases on it. You can use the same, you can use a different one, doesn't matter. Yep. And then we're going to go in a little bit more in depth on your work or your research. So your first task in your upper left-hand quadrant is to draw your study species, your study system, or your favorite animal. If you're not a researcher, or you don't work on an animal or something, but draw your study species or your system. Maybe I'll do this too. Okay, your next task is to draw a tool you use in your work. So this could be a microscope, this could be, I don't know, a pickaxe, maybe you're a miner, maybe you're a gold miner, maybe it's an eel trap if you're talking about my work, maybe it's a computer, maybe it's a pencil, some tool that you use. A pickaxe. I love that I came up with that. That's the first thing that came into my mind. Okay. Your third task is to draw the location where you do your work or your research. So this could be the state of California, or maybe it's an island in the Pacific, or maybe it's right here. Maybe it's the marine mammal pools at our coastal science campus. Is that you? I was like, is that me? I keep thinking it's me. Good. Okay, and lastly, I want you to draw your work, you doing your work or research. So maybe you're on a boat somewhere catching stuff. I said catching things, not touching things. Maybe you're on a boat touching stuff. I don't know. Maybe you're sitting at a computer. Maybe you're in a lecture hall. Maybe you're out planting something or measuring trees or tracking sea otters. I see one of you in here. Sketchnoting? Mm-hmm. Yep. I'll grab some paper and a marker. You sit over here if you'd like. So in this quick exercise, you have drawn an animal and you've drawn a tool, which is probably based on some simple shapes, right? Some squares and circles. You've drawn a location. Maybe it's a map or maybe it's a state. And then a person, right? You drew yourself doing work or research. So these are the 4 things that I draw a lot in my sketch notes. I draw tools and I draw people and I draw locations and I draw animals. I'm a biologist. Not everyone is a biologist, but I draw a lot of animals in my sketch notes. So there you go. You're sketchnoters now. You just drew 4 things that I draw all the time. So keep that in mind. All of you can do this, Joe. We're now going to get into a few sketchnoting techniques. I'm going to talk about some techniques that I use and how to actually do this in real life. So we've had some practice, but what are the actual steps when you're sketchnoting in a conference or in a lecture? The first thing I usually start out with is to plan. This involves, so if you got your sketchbook and your materials already, you know what you're going to use in terms of tools. Maybe it's a Sharpie, maybe it's markers, maybe it's crayons, who knows, whatever you want to use. We'll talk about that in a little while. We want to plan it out, maybe write the name of the lecture or the name of the talk and the person who's giving it, the date. Those are sorts of things that are, like, you can get those from a conference book, right? Or you know what the lecture you're going into is. Those are things that you can sort of plan ahead of time. Your next step is to listen. And this is possibly the most important part of sketchnoting, not even the drawing. This is the most important part. Think of yourself as art curators. So you're listening to a talk and you're listening for those main points that someone's saying, the words hypotheses, my conclusions are, and this will be on the exam. And those sorts of comments and statements, those are what you're listening for. And then you're thinking about, how do I translate that into something that's going to be useful for me? or maybe whatever they're talking about. Maybe if they're using an example of dolphins, well, maybe I should so curating what you're hearing and listening, and then representing those in visual form, which is using the same 4 things that we just drew, right? Maps and animals and simple shapes and connectors and things like that to link ideas when you get in your representing. And then you go back to listening, right? You listen more to what the person is saying and then you represent. When I'm sketchnoting, I actually find that I hardly look at presentations anymore. I mean, I do look at the presentations, especially when they're showing figures and graphs and animals and things like that. But ultimately, when I'm sketchnoting, I'm listening and I'm translating, and then I look up occasionally. But with really good presenters, they don't even really need their slides. Their slides are best for showing their data and things like that. But really good presenters, you can listen and hear the story and visually represent it. And it's actually kind of cool to have been able to realize, wow, I'm actually not depending as much on like reading the text on the slide as I used to. And then once you've done that, it's really important to synthesize. So think about, okay, you drew or you wrote those hypotheses. Were they supported? They probably told you at the end of their talk. You can go back and write little check marks right next to those hypotheses if they were not supported. Or you can draw things back to their introduction or other things, right? Using arrows to sort of synthesize your own notes. Maybe you missed something during the talk. It's helpful to go back later sometimes and fill in parts you missed. That's going to happen. People go fast. And then sharing your sketch notes. This is a total personal choice, but lots of people share their sketch notes, either with the person who gave the lecture or the talk, or with their colleagues or peers, maybe their classmates. I've shared my class notes that I've TA'd with students in the class, and I found them really helpful. That's been really gratifying when people are like, these are really great. I really enjoy using these. This has been really helpful. So it's totally a personal choice, but lots of people use them to share. And it's a really good scientific communication tool, right? You can show the members of the public, like via Twitter or Facebook or your blog, what your colleagues or your peers or other people you saw at a conference are. So that's been cool. So that's sort of like a broad overview of sort of how you do this. I rarely think, now I'm in the listening stage. Yes. But these are sorts of things that you will think about as you're starting to sketchnote and practicing. But also really important, obviously, are what you actually go ahead and draw. So I'm going to talk about colors. All of you are really cool, and that all of you have your own unique font. This is really awesome, and everyone's handwriting is totally different. And there's lots of different ways to emphasize font and make fonts and stand out. I actually use a fair amount of text in my text. I draw a lot, but I do have text to describe, well, this is the species that I'm talking about. Writing or writing an important point. Underlining some, title or subheading. I still use text, right? I don't just draw. And there's lots of ways to make text still sketchnotey. So one really cool thing is text emphasis. Write words that look like their definition. Right? These are great for titles or headings and things like that. These are a few that I just did that are different ways to make text. You can underline in different ways. You can put arrows around it. You can put brackets. Infinite number of ways that you can make just even simple lines of text in your own handwriting stand out. But more than that, take your time to practice some writing and use these different fonts that you already have in your arsenal. I just threw these up super quickly, just thinking about which kinds of type like fonts that I've seen before in my life. You all have these too. So when you're getting started with sketchnoting, it's often helpful to just take a piece of paper and just write a word in a bunch of different ways. See what kinds of different things you can come up with. And writing words in fun, sketchy, creative ways is one of the most fun parts about sketchnoting, more even than drawing. Like, it's also fun. Color is a personal preference. I have read online that some people are really anti-color. They like the clean lines of black and white, which look really good. It looks very professional to be black and white or grayscale. Sometimes adding just one color is cool. This is the same sketchnoter, Matthew McGain. But he just added the color orange in here, which also looks very clean, very professional. You can also go full color, which is kind of how I do my sketch notes. So like if you flip through my sketchbook, I use a lot of color, but I really like color. So recently I've been starting to do more black and white, and I have to admit it does look really good and it's very affordable. So this is totally up to you, and I recommend that you go and practice. You have a marker now. So you can so now you have the possibility of doing at least black and white and color. But I recommend you go and experiment. And we'll talk a little bit more about different materials to reach those different types of aesthetics. Other things that I use, so more about emphasizing and connecting and simplifying ideas. I use a lot of called text demarcations, speech bubbles and thought bubbles and brackets and boxes. They're really useful for drawing out important points or writing a little like reminder box, like remember that we talked about this. Or here's an aside, like something about math that I really like using those. And arrows, I have a million arrows in my sketch notes, and you can do that. And there are a million different ways to draw arrows. You can draw them fat, you can draw them with little dots at the end. You can draw them filled in or not. It's totally up to you. And I use different arrows depending on what I'm doing, and I'll show you an example of that in a few seconds. And then basic shapes. All of you, I'm pretty sure, can draw a circle and a square and a triangle. And I use those shapes a lot in my sketch notes. They're really useful, even within your sketch notes. Even if you're planning on sharing with someone, you can always decide to use some symbol in place of a more complex object. So maybe you can't really draw a bird, or you don't feel comfortable drawing a bird. But you could use a circle instead, and that could represent your bird instead throughout your sketch notes. And I'll show you an example of that as well on the next slide. This is an example of one of my sketch notes. Does anyone know what I'm showing here? Yeah, so this is now alveoli, there are lungs, this is a blood capillary. I'm using all of these different 3 things in this drawing. Here's I drew a box around my normal to draw that out and show that that's what's being demonstrated in this drawing. I use a variety of different arrows, a red arrow to show blood flow, to show where partial pressure of oxygen was high. And then I used basic shapes, right? I didn't draw a red blood cell. I used a circle instead. And that's so this is and I used a circle for the alveoli. I didn't shade it as a globe looking thing. I didn't draw multiple lines, right? This is a very simple drawing, but I think that it gets the point across. For me, right, if I was looking at this again, I would know that. I use just simple shapes, right? This isn't complex drawing, this isn't art. And along with that, you can use a lot of different symbols and icons that all of you probably are aware of, this universal icon set. Here are some more that are just from PowerPoint icon library. And these male, female symbols, right? Happy and sad, sun, maybe sound or music for music notes, math symbols, exclamation points are good for, an important point someone made in a talk or something like that. They're useful for a lot of different more complex ideas that you can just quickly draw, question mark instead of writing, I'm not sure about this idea, something like that. These are the kinds of things that are useful to practice. So if you're getting started in sketchnoting and you're going to draw a lot of fish, or you're going to draw a lot of eyeballs, or you work a lot with climate change and you need to draw a lot of snowflakes to represent cold weather, or fire to represent global warming or something like that. Those are the kinds of things that it's actually helpful to practice so that you have kind of an icon image library so that you can draw on those quickly when you need to. These are some examples of ones that I've used in my sketch notes. So these 2 are from the same talk. It was on birds. And instead of writing male and male, I use, or male and female, I use symbols. And this was to represent different bird populations and how they sound different. So I could have written that out, but instead I just drew a little kind of crappy California and then put the music notes in, and that got the point across to me that birds in different areas sound different. This is an example from a friend's master's talk, and this is a time when I determined that I was going to draw a big green fish at the beginning of my talk, and this is going to, or the beginning of my sketch notes. This is going to represent a largemouth bass. And this little orange guy is going to represent a sunfish. So this is a time when someone else looking at my notes may not have realized that unless they'd seen the whole set where I had a little like legend kind of where I pointed it out. And then I used the sort of universal no symbol, which most of you would probably recognize as meaning that there were no additional fish in this treatment. And then I use color here to represent two different types of treatments. It's a kind of complicated research setup. But this helps me to understand like what she was actually doing with her trials. So it's an example of not only using like icons in the no symbol, but also colors to denote different things, and defining a symbol at the start of my sketch notes to use throughout the rest of the talk, rather than drawing a largemouth bass, which I don't know if that I'm capable of. I want to stress that it's totally fine to miss stuff, right? That's totally natural. You're going to encounter people who speak really quickly or have talks that just are, they didn't set them up to be sketch notable. They didn't think about how people are getting that information. And I really like humor. They make my sketch notes way more fun to go back and read when I'm reading these little bubbles that I wrote in. Lots of times presenters or lecturers actually are really funny. They're constantly making comments that are actually pretty hilarious. And it's fun to record those in your notes as sort of a personal, like emotional, that's your emotional connection, right? You remember laughing at some point in class. This is from a seminar talk. Terry Williams is hilarious. She's constantly making little jokes in Animal Phys. And I was like constantly recording those because she was just funny. This is a time when I missed something. Someone got really in the weeds with a bunch of R coding things. And I just was like, I'm not going to try. I'm just going to write fun R things, go here, vegan, etc. If I want to go back and talk to that person, I have their name, right? I can go back and ask what exactly they did there. And sometimes my drawings are really crappy. Those were in notes that I actually handed students. I just thought that was like really pretty bad drawing. And the student who got the notes was like, I liked your little like comments about your person holding their breath. And I make mistakes too, right? I have lots of scratch outs in my sketch notes. I'm also not a purist. You can decide for yourself. Some sketch noters like, I never use whiteout. Like, sketch notes, like once they're made, or that's it, you know? But I think whiteout's fine. If you need to go back and white out something that you messed up, I think that's fine. I'm not a purist about it, but it's a personal choice. But I want to stress that this is totally fine in sketchnoting. Like you will encounter issues like this.
I find a lot of the time that I'm trying to like synthesize information that might not have been clear, like making a table or something from a lecture. Like I take away the wrong thing.
Oh yeah.
I like interpret it wrong. Do you have any ways to like avoid those in general? Like mistakes are okay, but if you're gonna like study something,
yeah. Well, that's when like probably going back to like if you're in a lecture in a classroom, going back to like reading the textbook, right? If you're not sure about some information you got, that's the time when you probably would go to a textbook or go to a peer, right, and say like, what did you get for this? Because I've certainly done that too in my sketch notes for Animal Phys. There was at least one thing that mistake I made in the information, and a student she got my notes and then she said, I think this is incorrect, and then we worked through it, and I corrected my sketch notes later. In that case, you might want to, your sketch notes are a great place to have a little box and say, this is wrong, and here's why it's wrong, and here's where I corrected it. You know, flip the page over. Okay, so that brings us to our next practice. Okay. So this is another 4-quadrant one. So you can use the back of the one that you folded or a different one altogether. Whatever you choose. Okay. And the first thing you're going to draw are some members of the public. So some members of the public. So think about what those people might be holding. Find and draw stick figures. What do members of the public look like? What might they be doing? Are they small? Are they large? Are they male? Are they female? Are they wearing baseball caps? Or they're wearing a Trump supporter hat, you know, whatever. Maybe. Okay, once you've gotten that done, I want you to draw some undergraduates. So what are undergraduates holding, or what are they doing, or where might they be sitting? You've probably all encountered some undergraduates. If you haven't ever encountered undergraduates, maybe you can draw some students of the general variety. Okay, and then your third task is to draw some scientists. So how might they vary from the first two groups? Are they holding Erlenmeyer flasks? Are they wearing lab coats? Are they holding a fish? Maybe they're drinking a lot of coffee. What sorts of icons or symbols might you use to distinguish them from the other groups? Okay, I was like, I think it's on me. Okay. And then lastly, I want you to draw your lab group. Or if you don't have a lab group, maybe your family or your group of friends. Totally acceptable. What do those people look like? Maybe some distinguishing characteristics about them. Members of my lab group are in the audience today, so I guess I have to actually draw this one. Maybe what are they holding? What are their favorite hobbies? Great, so here you've drawn several different groups of people. I draw a lot of these groups of people as representatives of exactly what we have. So sometimes people in talks will mention, I told this to the public, or I really want to, further education of this topic with members of the public or something like that. Instead of writing that, you could draw some members of the public, right? What that means to you. Or maybe you're talking about scientists in the scientific community. Helpful to think about now, like what sorts of icons or symbols or things that they're holding differentiates that group or others from each other. So this is like a fun little exercise you can do with different groups or different animals or different fish species, whatever you're working on that you think you might have to draw a lot. Great. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next part, which is some sketchnoting challenges, which we touched on right in the beginning when we talked about time and everything like that. The first one I'm going to actually talk about is where do I actually sit in the room. So physical considerations are actually really important. Some things to consider are the light sources. So I've definitely been at conferences where they turn off all the lights, except for the ones in the back. Or I've been in lectures where all the lights are on. So is lighting a concern for your specific talk or the room that you're in? That's going to influence where you sit because you got to see your paper. If you need space for your materials, so we're going to talk about materials in a few slides, but if you have a lot of materials, like a set of markers, right? I use this marker set a lot. Sometimes I like to have a space next to me, like a chair next to me, either to put them on or to stick them under my leg and I can pull them out. But if there's someone sitting right here, that makes that a little challenging. So sometimes thinking about if you need an extra chair. Maybe if you're right or left-handed, which hand are you going to draw with? If you're going to be moving your elbow, you don't want to be jabbing the person next to you. Some of these conferences are tight on space, or lectures, right? In our classroom downstairs, the space can get pretty tight. So you think about that. This is an important one. If you think your sketchnoting is going to be a distraction to other people, or if you don't want people looking over your shoulder. So lots of people love to see people drawing. This is like a cool thing for other conference attendees. If that bothers you, that people are watching you draw, then maybe sitting closer to the back is better. Or if you think that your sketchnoting is going to be a big distraction, maybe you've got your whole little on plein air paint set up, and you're painting on an easel. In that case, maybe it's better to move a little bit further back so that other people can concentrate on the talk. But both of these concerns, you could sit right in the front where your visual line of sight is best for the person, right? You'll be able to see the person the best. You'll be able to see their talk, their figures, hear them the best. So sitting in the front's great if you think that your sketchnoting is not going to distract other people and you don't mind other people looking at what you're doing. So these are just sort of personal things to think about. And it gets easier. When I first started sketching, I was like, I have to sit in the back because I'm so embarrassed I'm doing this. But now I'm like, I'll sit wherever. It doesn't really matter to me. This is my form of note taking, and I think it's cool. So other people can ask me later about it and be like, can I see your notes? So now I don't care as much. But it definitely was a little bit more of a worry when I first started doing it. Next question that I get often is, how do I organize my page? So I'm sketching, but like, where do I actually put stuff? And the answer is everyone does this differently. You can do left to right and top to bottom if you want. You can do sort of a zigzag with arrows connecting your different ideas or points. Some people like to have text on the left, sketches on the right. We saw that in one of our videos, right? Rachel Smith's 13-year-old niece was using little squares to sort of show and separate things. So she was including like little boxes throughout her page. Maybe you like the idea of doing a web, having a central main idea or a person's name and their conference title, and then having sort of sections coming off of that central idea. Or you could do it any way you want. Just make sure it's clear to you. If you have to go back and read these later, you want to make sure that you can follow your train of thought and the information on the page. So it's really up to you. I usually go with probably the first or the second option here. And I usually separate things with like a little dotted line or something to indicate that I'm, in the method section, the results or whatever, or we're in a new lecture topic. But it's really up to you, and I've used all of these at one point. So they're all good for different things. Other sketchnoting challenges, the person's going too fast. This is a really common one. It's a problem for everyone who does this, who takes notes in general, right? Not just visual note taking, but note taking in general. Remember that you're an art curator. You're concentrating on the most important points that person's saying, and if they're going really fast, really, it's your job to listen and to quickly get down what they're saying. So quick sketches, no long drawings, and listening for those really important points. It's also helpful to set up your page beforehand, right? Have that title already ready, have their name, have their date, have the lecture title. I'm still bad at drawing. So the only way to get really better is to practice. So building up a library of practice doodles to draw off of. Just getting started doing this, right? Grab a notepad, get a pen and start sketching. That's really the way you're going to get better at drawing if that is one of your biggest concerns. But like I said, remind yourself that simple drawings are often the best anyway because you're trying to get fast information down rapidly. Some people, their topic is just really complex and it's hard to represent graphically. That's one of the most fun challenges of sketchnoting. How do you visually represent a complex topic? But sometimes, like I'm in a couple math classes right now, and sometimes it's sort of just unavoidable that you're going to have to write equations or draw graphs or things like that. This is an example of an equation we use in animal phys. And instead of drawing this out in some way, I try to use color instead to draw my eye to the like 3 different variables and then giving an example value for each or the normal value for each. That was my MO. And if you take a look through my sketchpad later, you'll notice there's a lot of equations for some of my classes, and it was just kind of unavoidable. But it's fun to have no lines on my page. So if I do want to add things in or draw colors or notes, then it's easier to do. I've also had to do a lot of like proving equations with one of the classes that several of you took with me last quarter. There was a lot of like mathematical proofs, and to track what variables we're doing through those proofs, I highlighted them in different colors, and that helped me when I look back at it later. So sometimes it's just unavoidable, and that's something we all just have to come to terms with, right? Sometimes things are just hard to draw. Okay, your third practice. This is the last practice before you practice my little mini talk. So grab another piece of paper, maybe the back of one. Hopefully you'll have some folded already. And I want you to draw, in the first quadrant, I want you to draw a pirate ship. Huh? I want you to draw a pirate ship. And I'm going to give you, I don't know, maybe 20 more seconds for this. Yeah, okay, I'll give you 30. I think I'm supposed to give you a minute, so yeah, I'll give you a minute. Okay, maybe another 15 seconds or so. Final details of your pirate ship. What is it doing? Is there a story that it's telling? Is it sinking? Are they sailing the high seas, happily singing sea shanties? Okay. In your next quadrant, all right, everyone stop. In your next quadrant, I want you to draw a pirate ship, but you're only going to get 30 seconds. Okay, everyone stop. Guess what you're going to draw in your third quadrant? A pirate ship, but only going to give you 15 seconds. All right, go. All right, everyone stop. All right, final time, I swear. You're going to draw a pirate ship, and I'm going to give you 5 seconds. All right, go. All right, everyone stop. So sometimes information is going to come rapidly, and you'll notice probably as you went through your drawings, you lost some detail. Okay, but did you keep the story that you were trying to tell, or the most important points of your pirate ship? That's what you do in sketchnoting, right? You go from these sort of complicated drawings that you might have a lot of detail to something where you're telling the bare bones of the story, the most important points. So maybe who was on it, or what type of boat it was, or how fast it was sinking, or what was happening in this terms of your pirate ship. So that's just a fun little exercise. Okay, any questions up to this point on anything? sketching challenges or tools, anything? A lot of information for just an hour, but it'll give you some tools. We're going to move on to materials now. There are a lot of options for tools, and I just recommend that you go out and experiment with what you like to do. I'll give you a few. So pens of various varieties. Mike Rode, he's a really excellent sketchnoting resource. He's written a couple books on the topic. He likes just using straight black and white pens. The pros of these are that they're really easy to transport. They look really clean. They don't require heavy paper because they don't bleed through typically, so you can use it on a regular notebook. But the cons are they're sharp lines. So if you like sort of more of a dreamy look, they don't really provide that. And there's a potential lack of like layering of color and blending of colors and adding colors sometimes. Shale Matsuda, who I took this workshop from at 60 in January, he uses portable watercolors. He has this like cool little tiny set and a pen that basically acts as a brush, I believe. I've never actually seen him do it, but has this little block, and he watercolors his sketch notes, which is amazing to me. The pros, they look incredibly beautiful. They look very professional too. They have this sort of dreamy vibe. They're great at blending colors. The cons, they do require like a little bit of practice. There's sort of learning curve using them, and there's some sort of cleanup and setup involved. You need a little bit more space than with just one pen. Markers, so this is what I use. I think these are great for adding lots of color. They're very portable. They're relatively inexpensive. The cons, I have to use a thicker paper. They will bleed through if I don't. And there's no real, like, I can't blend colors so well using these. There are markers that you can do that with. And they also require a little bit more space. And then the fourth one is digital tools, which I know Jessie uses digital tools, like an iPad or their tablet. These look really great. They're easy to share. Sharing is super easy, right? You don't need to scan or take photos or anything. You have them in digital form. Easy to set up and clean up. You just have your tablet, pull it out. The cons are that the tools are a lot more expensive than some of these other methods. And I've read that the big picture can be hard to see. Like if you're zoomed in and drawing something in small detail, it's hard to see sort of the big picture about your sketch. What is the main story that you're visually telling? And there's some maybe tech issues, run out of battery, there's other noises, the stylus isn't working, your hand hits the screen instead of the stylus, whatever the case may be, there are some other issues there. I recommend you go and experiment. So if you just head down to Palace Arts in downtown, they have a million options for pens and markers and colored pencils and watercolors, and you can choose your favorite and play around with a bunch of different options. I am still playing around with the stuff that I like to use. I've switched black pens like a billion times to try to find the ones that give me the best lines and the color for their value and lifespan. I recommend you go out and investigate and think about what kind of art you like. Do you like the dreamy look? Do you like the sharp lines? Probably most of you have an idea just subtly, like sketch notes that you've seen in today's presentation that you really like or that you really hate, right? So thinking about that can be helpful. And then for what you want to actually draw on, lots of options. I use an 8x10 kind of heavier weight paper, sketch pad. Other people like the Moleskines, these like tiny little notebooks. Size is also important. I love this 8x10. I feel like it really feels great in my hand. It's a good size for me. Other people like things that are more like this size, smaller, little sketches. I know Jessie has your tablet's really big, so she likes a larger screen to draw on. It's really personal preference and portability. Like, where are you going to be doing these sketch notes? Are you going to be just sticking something in a purse at a conference? Are you going to be taking these in class and lectures? That's also something to think about. Some people just use regular graph paper. Graph paper is great for sketchnoting because there's no real like line. I mean, there are lines, but it's more like there's not that pressure to draw within the lines, right? But 13-year-old Elizabeth was using regular college ruled paper, so that's an option too. Whatever you think you might enjoy or have access to or have the money for, right? Some of these supplies are a little more, Moleskines are definitely more expensive than a regular notebook. So these are things to think about too. Yes, that's true. So if you're interested in digital tools, Jessie's a great resource about what kinds of programs are out there, like CorelDRAW or Sketchpad, I think is another one, or just Sketch. There's lots of options for different OneNote. It was just like the Procreate. That's a really good one. Lots of people like Procreate. So these are just different options if you have a tablet and that's something you're interested in trying. Lots of different tools, lots of great resources online. I'm going to provide you with some of those resources at the end here. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes to actually kicking us out a little bit of this room. I'm going to give a practice talk. So grab another piece of paper. This is your chance. I don't know how this talk sketch notes, so you will have to tell me afterwards. And I'm going to be talking to you today about how the morphology affects dispersal of ear larvae in the Eastern Pacific. My name's Kat. You can set up your paper, do whatever you want, draw a cool font, use some color, use some text. Okay. So like I said, I'm going to be talking about how morphology affects dispersal of ear larvae in the Eastern Pacific. And as most of you are probably aware, many marine fishes have a planktonic larval stage. So this is a larvae that may start in one area where it's spawned and hatched, but it might move somewhere else over the course of its pelagic larval period, goes to a new population. And some larvae may have some local recruitment. They might recruit to the same adult populations where they've spawned. And a big question for fisheries biologists and others and marine ecologists is what actually influences this larval movement? And this can tell us something about how populations persist over time. What are the possibilities that species will expand their ranges or move to new locations? Larval dispersal is a big topic for fisheries biology. And there are a lot of different factors that interact to determine the likelihood of dispersal. So these involve direction of currents, maybe turbulence, if there are these sort of other oceanographic processes, these sort of large-scale eddies or circles of currents that are sort of moving up coasts maybe. Geographic features like our California Bight or headlands or seamounts. Water temperature, where are the adults actually spawning? And then there are a lot of things intrinsic to the larvae. So these include how long they're actually staying in the plankton for, which we call the pelagic larval duration period. If they're swimming, are these larvae moving on their own at all? Are they sensitive to some environmental cue like magnetism or temperature, or like outflowing from a river? Maybe it's their growth rate. Does that influence how fast they can escape predation and get to a new location? Today, we're going to be talking about body shape. So this is the thing I'm most interested in. And we already know that body shape can influence how other animals move through fluids. A really excellent example of this comes from birds and fish. Birds with long, skinny wings, high aspect ratios, are better at gliding through the air. And same with fish, caudal fins. And then fish and birds with sort of lower aspect ratios, short stubby fins, they're better for quick turns and rapid takeoffs and burst speed. So we already know that shape can influence how animals move through fluids, but it's never been investigated for larval fish. And this is probably because most fish larvae are too small for larger processes to influence their dispersal. In the small size, these microscale processes become more important. It's related to fluid dynamics and how large an organism is, but water actually acts differently when things are small. But I'm interested in, could the body shape of an especially large fish larvae potentially influence dispersal? That's my main question. We know that fish larvae come in a lot of shapes and sizes. Here are just a few of the myriad of options. They're skinny and long and sort of round and circular with big heads and tails. They vary a lot. And one especially interesting group are eel larvae. So eel larvae are these sort of leaf-shaped, flattened, clear, interesting-looking guys with a tiny little head and a big body. It's called a leptocephalus, and which means slim head. And they have the longest pelagic larval duration period among fish larvae. So they are present in the ocean for longer than any other fish at the larval stage. And they also have a really high maximum body. Some of them have a very high maximum body size and a high growth rate compared to other fish larvae. So when you consider that most fish larvae get to be maybe a few millimeters in length, it's especially astonishing to consider that this was a larvae that I caught off Oregon a couple years ago, and it was about 32 centimeters long, which is incredible when you're thinking about how that compares to most other fish. So I think these guys are a great study species for looking at body shape and dispersal. My main research questions are, how do morphological characteristics scale within and across eel species? And can we use body shape or scaling patterns to predict dispersal range? So how does body shape actually influence where they go and how long they travel for, or how far they travel for? I used a morphological data set provided to me by NOAA that covered 17 species across 9 families, 2 depth patterns. The 2 depth patterns were deep water species, which is kind of your like nightmare Halloween fish, your gulper eels, your bobtail eels. They're usually bathypelagic and mesopelagic, which means they live really deep. And then the shallow water species, which are probably more familiar to everyone, the congers, the morays, the snake eels. All of my species had greater than 10 individuals, and they represented a wide spread of pre-transition body types. So I have sort of an ontogenetic series of fish. And I looked at 8 morphological characteristics. So I usually split these into what I call segment lengths. So south to anus length, body depth, predorsal length, and then appendage lengths, which are different fin lengths, head length, and eye diameter, and head width. Dispersal distance, I approximated through longitudinal range. So I found that longitude didn't really significantly predict where we were finding larvae, but latitude did. And I got adult range through Atlas number 33, which is a larval ID guide, and also FishBase, which is an online resource. They were basically the same because there's very little data available. That's represented here by this black line. We had a couple incomplete larval range metrics. So one of these was any information that was available in this larval guide, which was very limited, only present for some species. We had the location of actual specimens within this data set, but this is an underestimate because sampling coverage doesn't cover everywhere where these species live. And then we had what I calculated to be the maximum possible range from both adult and larval data. And this is assuming that adults don't disperse. So if we found an adult somewhere, the larvae must have made it there as well. That was my assumption. We used this last characteristic, as the best predictor. I thought it was probably the closest to the actual value. And then I did some modeling of using standard least squares model with log transform morphological characteristics. I probably won't actually talk about this in this talk. So we'll probably skip over that. So I found that certain characteristics showed very strong convergence patterns. So this is aspect ratio. And I found that shallow water species all converge on this sort of long, thin body shape. And deep water species, which are these black guys, had a lot more variation, right? Some were short and fat, some were long and skinny. Yeah, but I found that that varied depending on which characteristic. So this is basically tail length. And we found that tail length varied a lot between species. No matter what depth category you were part of, tail length seems to be one of these characteristics that has not been conserved or has not been converged upon. We did find that aspect ratio typically increases as body length increases. That means that most species got thinner as they grow. So they got thinner and longer with body length. That is represented here by these darker lines. Some species scaled isometrically, which means that they had proportional growth over their ontogeny as larvae. And then one species looked like this and actually got deeper as he got older, as that larvae got older. When we looked at how, like, the general overall shape, body shape, this is a PCA representing body shape right after hatching. So at their smallest size, where are these different species falling within what we call a morphospace, which represents these sort of overall body shapes. And we found that deep water species and shallow water species look a lot more similar to one another, like within group similarities when they're small. But as they're larger, when they get larger and closer to transitioning to being adults, we found that they diverge much more strongly in terms of body shape. This makes a lot of sense for deep water species who look very different as adults. They're taxonomically very diverse. And some of them are long and thin, and some of them have really big heads and skinny tails. They're very diverse morphologically even as adults. And we start seeing this even within the larval stage before transition actually happens. That was kind of interesting. Next, I'm going to talk about how body shape or scaling patterns can be used to actually predict dispersal range, which we were really interested in. I'm just going to show you one graph. And this is showing that body shape at minimum size appears to influence dispersal. So remember that first figure that I showed you on the slide. We found that their overall general body shape, when they're small, can predict where they go. But interestingly, we found the opposite of what we might expect. We thought that high aspect ratios might encourage gliding movement, being picked up by currents and moved. We actually found the opposite. The species with high aspect ratios, long tails, short heads, long predorsifin lengths, they had narrower ranges. They were found in a narrower band of latitudes than we expected. And deep water species that are short and fat are found much more widespread. And our modeling results corroborate this, it supports this. We found that deep water species with short tails went further, shallow water species with long tails went further. Yeah. Short heads, long heads. So we found some opposite trends actually between shallow water and deep water species. So something different is happening between these two groups. So with one group, you might find that short tails, they have longer ranges. Shallow water species might find that longer tails have longer ranges. Short tails have shorter ranges, long tails have shorter ranges, depending on what group you're part of. So if you're shallow water or deep water. So that was also interesting. So something different, fundamentally different is happening between these two depth patterns. So we did find that morphology was able to predict dispersal, but probably not by passive advection, not by being picked up and transported like animals and other fluids, like birds in the air, gliding, right? We didn't really find that. So, and this was indicated by that these high aspect ratio larvae not having larger ranges. We did find that trends seem more driven by adult habitat. So maybe some species of eels, the larvae go farther. We just don't have the data. The larvae go farther, but the adults actually can't settle or survive in the habitat because it's not appropriate for them. Maybe the substrate's not right. More likely the water temperature isn't really appropriate. A lot of these species are tropical eels found in the Gulf of California that likely can't survive in our kelp forests here. We also found that the shallow water species that have small ranges but high aspect ratios, we are hypothesizing that maybe body shape is instead related to swimming ability. Long, thin larvae are better able to swim. And these shallow water species that are wafted offshore by currents, they have to swim back to adult habitats. If they live right offshore, they have to make it back there somehow. So they a better swimming ability may have been selected for over time. And we found that deep water species are more kite-like, these long, these short, fat shapes, which might help with upward vertical movements instead. So doing this sort of upward and downward migration, and maybe moving to different adult habitats if adults are found typically within the depth range. Maybe this shape helps with that movement. So yes, this last point is related to how we found that trends are driven by this adult habitat. Here's a larvae swimming. So we know that they are good swimmers, at least in some species, and when they're large. So this helps to support, this is one thing that supports our hypothesis that these shallow water species are swimming at some extent. So in conclusion, we found that eel larvae grow very different from one another, even within related groups. We found that body shape does predict a larvae's ability to disperse, but probably not through the mechanisms that we originally predicted. And we're hypothesizing adult habitat is likely a very important factor in larval body shape, in what's predicting that. And we need more information on larval range because a lot of these species are very understudied. Okay, so I don't know how that talk went for sketchnoting. That concludes our workshop. Wow, we ended perfectly on time. I want to make some final points here. Practice makes perfect. Get out there and sketchnote. Grab a pen, grab a Sharpie. There's free ones for grad students. Go grab one. Examine your own presentation. So I didn't really think about mine today, but examine your own. Could someone sketch note what you're talking about? Are you flipping through slides really quickly? Do you speak really rapidly? These are all sorts of things to think about when you're creating your own presentations. Work on developing your own image library to draw from. It's normal to make mistakes and misinformation, and don't forget to include some humor, and share your sketch notes if you feel so inclined. Here are some other resources. Like I said, Mike Road is a really good resource for this. Matthew McGain is another one. All these people have great Twitter feeds. They're constantly talking about scientific communication, sketchnoting, and they all have really great online resources as well on their websites or in books. Yeah, I recommend looking these people up. We will share this presentation with you. We've been recording it, so we can share it with you if you'd like some of these resources or some of the other things that I've talked about and refer back to. I'm happy to provide that. And my contact information is here. I'll go back to the other side. But if you also want to put down my information, you're welcome to email me with any questions. Visit my website. Follow me on Twitter. I'm still getting the Twitter thing. Working on it. And thank you so much. Yeah.
If you all want to see some of Pat's beautiful work.
Oh God, what does she have? Oh. I do some art on the side too. I will admit I have done some art, but I don't know if I'd call myself an artist. Mine are great. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. The markers are yours to keep if you want to keep your marker. Or you want to take another one. So. Thank you guys for coming. And thank you for everyone who tuned in online.